Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Super review for episode 22, which is called Change, Impossible Resurrection. The name is Ginyu, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the plot, the action, interesting details, my impressions of the episode, and my most memorable moment of the episode, along with my overall thoughts on the episode as a whole. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So in terms of the plot, I just want to start off by saying I was pretty shocked because the pacing went a lot faster than what I expected, and obviously the plot focused on the fights that the Z Fighters had against Tagoma and Ginyu, which is pretty simple and straightforward. But what I really appreciated about this episode in particular is they managed to squeeze in several things. Not only did they kind of end the Tagoma arc, they also introduced the Ginyu arc. They also brought in Goten and Trunks, although very briefly and to a minor role, they brought them in, and they also showed Frieza exacting his revenge on the Z Fighters, especially with that other scene we saw in the episode near the end where we saw Goku and Vegeta training in that alternate reality or dimension or whatever you want to call it. And I think that the fact that they managed to squeeze in so many new things into such a small span of just 20 minutes, that really impressed me with, you know, the pacing of the plot, and I definitely liked all the things they managed to do for this episode, even though the main thing was fighting against Tagoma and Ginyu. In terms of this episode's action, I was pretty impressed. One thing I definitely was not impressed with is that I thought Goten and Trunks should be involved in the fight. It was weird how they weren't really involved much in the action at all. I mean, they came as Gotenks and they basically diffused instantly. And then, you know, if you look outside of that whole Goten and Trunks fighting against Tagoma arc, I mean, the Z Fighters really didn't put up much of a fight against Tagoma / Ginyu. But what I did like, though, is that we finally got a chance to see a henchman with considerable power, because usually in Dragon Ball, you know, the Z Fighters get through the quasi-boss or, you know, the upper henchman relatively easy without that much struggling, and then the big boss, you know, dominates them. But it was interesting to see other characters being involved in the action, even if it was brief. So I thought the action was pretty solid for this episode, and I think next episode's probably going to even be better. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the new hyperbolic time chamber / room of spirit and time room that Goku and Vegeta were in this episode. And the first thing I'm just going to point out is that I'm just going to call it the cloudy dimension, because just saying those names over and over again is going to get redundant. But in the cloudy dimension, what I noticed about Goku and Vegeta is that this is heavily foreshadowing the fact that this is where they're going to learn the Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan transformation. The first thing is that how Goku was noticing there's a difference in the timing between what's happening on the real world and what's going on inside there, which I don't know how Goku would be able to tell the difference in the time if he's in there. But if you also look at the fact that the time is different in there, you also look at the fact that Vegeta was saying, well, we can't move unless we manage to keep our ki from leaking out, which is really interesting because that's foreshadowing, well, that's how they're going to learn the Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan transformation, because they're going to manage to keep the God ki within themselves so they can utilize it as a tool. And obviously, if they're going to be in there for an extended period of time, that gives them enough time to learn and master the transformation and train with each other, if Vegeta wants to train with Goku, in time, so that when they come out of their dimension, they're already strong enough to go combat Frieza. Even though I would have personally preferred it if Whis had somewhat of a bigger role in directly instructing them on how to do it, but if Goku and Vegeta learn it on their own, that's just fine with me. And I really like that whole concept that they were, you know, developing for Dragon Ball Super. Interesting point. Now, in terms of my next interesting detail, I wanted to talk about the power scaling, and I had a huge problem here because the power scaling's all over the place. The first thing I wanted to say is I have no clue how strong Tagoma / Ginyu and Tagoma's body is, but I will say this: if Goten and Trunks sensed him and noticed something great, and they immediately flew over, that's telling me that he must have had a significant power, and they obviously fused off screen to combat him, which is telling me that they sensed him was a big threat for them. So that's one thing, even though that's inconsistent, because they should have been able to sense Frieza's huge power and then immediately come after that. But either way, outside of just Tagoma, I'm now thinking about how weak is Gohan, because this Gohan we're seeing in Resurrection F, it's kind of weird because he would have been a decline in power from what he was from Ultimate Gohan, but this Gohan looks like he's way weaker than even Gohan was at the beginning of the Buu Saga. And the reason I'm saying this is because Gohan was able to go Super Saiyan 2 you know, during the beginning of the Buu Saga when he was demonstrating it for Kibito. And he also had no problem transforming into a Super Saiyan slash Super Saiyan 2 against Dabura. Whether or not you believe he was a Super Saiyan 1 or a Super Saiyan 2, that's up for your interpretation. But the point is, he didn't struggle going into a basic Super Saiyan at all. This Gohan could barely go Super Saiyan. And this is telling me that Goten and Trunks at this point might even be stronger than he is. I mean, so it made no sense to me why they were running away and cowering away from, you know, Tagoma, if Gohan in his Super Saiyan form would probably be that much weaker. And obviously Goten and Trunks, in my opinion, should be at least stronger than all of the other Z fighters outside of Piccolo. So if you look at it like that, all of the power scaling just didn't make sense. Maybe they were just immature kids who just got scared, but you know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. All of the power scaling was completely off, and, you know, I really have no idea how strong anybody is. But you know what? Dragon Ball Nation and I are going to make a video on this, and, you know, we're going to talk about how strong all these characters are, because the power scaling is really, really off in this episode. Now, the next interesting detail I wanted to point out really quickly is the fact that this is more relating to the lines of filler than anything else, because of the fact that Bulma made a reference to the filler when she was talking about how she knew about Captain Ginyu as a frog. And obviously, for those of you who know, Bulma switched bodies with Captain Ginyu during a filler episode during the Namek saga, and, you know, obviously because of that, you know, she would have had, you know, like a negative relationship with it, which is now adding more confusion to that whole canonicity of Dragon Ball Super. But there's already filler references, you know, such as how Miss Pizza and Karoni were also able to be in a previous episode, who were strictly filler characters. So honestly, I just say enjoy the show and just watch the direction that it goes in. So in terms of my impressions for this episode, I'm definitely going to have to say it was very shocking, you know, the way that Gohan almost died, Piccolo almost died. Those were definitely the shocking highlights of this episode. But besides those moments, you know, the other things that were kind of surprising was how off the power scaling was, how weak Gohan has now become. And the other thing is how Ginyu was able to master Tagoma's power that quickly. Now, I understand he has a history of, you know, swapping bodies with people, which is why I say that that previous body he was in, you know, with, you know, the horns, I always felt that couldn't have been his original body, because how do you practice a body change technique? You have to use it on somebody, right? That's the way I look at it. So when you look at it like that, I can understand that Ginyu has experience doing it, but if you've been in the form of a frog for years, that's telling me that you would obviously be rusty, and I just can't see how he was able to do it that quick. For Goku, I know he had some problems using it, you know, because of the fact that Goku might have had a complicated body and Kaioken may have been hard for him to, you know, try to utilize, but it just didn't make sense to me how Ginyu could have just mastered it that quick. But, you know, other than that, all of that pretty much sums up to me why this episode was definitely shocking in the very least. So in terms of my most memorable moment of this episode, I'm sure you guys would have guessed this because I'm a big Piccolo fan, and I'm also a Gohan fan too, although not as much as I used to be. It would have to be when Piccolo was shot, you know, obviously trying to protect Gohan, and Gohan had it pretty bad in this episode. I mean, he looked like Swiss cheese after what Frieza had done to him. And, you know, right as Frieza's about to deliver the final blow, Piccolo jumps in a way to help him. And this reminds me of two instances in the Dragon Ball series. The first, obviously, would be, you know, when Nappa's about to kill, you know, Gohan, and Piccolo basically gives up his life to protect him, which is a huge thing. And also in the other instance, when, you know, the Z fighters are on Namek, and, you know, Frieza once again shoots a death beam, very similar to what happened now. And, you know, obviously Piccolo was severely injured in the process and had to be carried over to the spaceship. So, you know, this was a very, very shocking moment for me. And Duct Tape from Comic Corner, you know, obviously he warned me about it because he saw the episode before I did. And I will tell you, I was very, very shocked when I saw that moment. And it definitely would have to be my memorable moment of this episode. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I'm going to give this episode 4 stars. I thought it was a very good episode. It had a good usage of the plot. Goten and Trunks were brought over. They introduced a lot of new concepts and new different events that took place, and something major happened in the episode where we saw, you know, Ginyu swapping bodies with Tagoma. Gohan and Piccolo are almost dead, and that really brings us back to that old school Dragon Ball tension that I like. However, you're probably wondering why I dropped a star then, and the reason is because I just feel like Goten and Trunks, they just, even though they were in the episode, I felt they could have been better utilized. I mean, the whole point of Dragon Ball Super was for them to have a bigger role in this arc than they didn't have in, you know, obviously Resurrection F. And I feel like they just came for a few seconds as Gotenks hit Tagoma really hard, and then they basically had no other role, and that was a bummer. And in addition to that, all of those inconsistencies that were caused by the power scaling were really annoying to decipher. And it's just really weird how Gohan could get so weak. But other than all of that, guys, I thought it was a very good episode, and I definitely think it's worth your time. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and please share all of your thoughts in the comment section below, because to me, this is probably the most controversial episode of Dragon Ball Super to date.